Napoli fans around the world, welcome to Napoli Talk. Napoli is having one of their best ever seasons, being miles ahead of everybody else in the league and in the quarterfinals of the Champions League. And yet there is a civil war going on between the Ultras and the club, and maybe even between the Ultras themselves. Guys, so let's start off with what exactly is an Ultra and a bit of the history behind it. So guys, since the 50s, groups of supporters have always come together to support teams in a spontaneous way, but it really lacked organization and they didn't really make a lifestyle out of it. Then in the late 60s, Italy underwent a bit of a social revolution led by high school and university students, which came together to protest political and social issues. Now in 1972, on the wave of these protests, the first Ultras group in Naples was created, led by 14-year-old Montuori. Now it literally started with him filling a glass Coke bottle with some small rocks and shaking them around and getting other people in Curva B to do the same, creating this huge noise. Now this group of people started to call themselves Ultras, and they started to organize choreographies, banners, away game trips. They started using flags, drums, and megaphones to orchestrate their movements inside the stadium, and they created spots in the city to socialize, hang out, and organize future activities for these events. Now, without this level of organization, there is no atmosphere inside the stadium. Now, over the years, this particular group of Ultras actually turned itself into a holding company, creating journals and radio shows where they even reached over 900,000 listeners per episode, talking about things that relate to football. Now, in the 80s and 90s, they used this influence that they had over the masses to establish close relationships with the club and enter into a sort of partnership agreement with them. In exchange for constant support and to remain peaceful, the club would give them certain privileges. Now, these privileges include preferential access to tickets, money for financing their football-related activities, and other times, maybe not so much, and obviously presence of players to parties, inaugurations, and so on. In the meantime, especially between the 80s and 90s, other groups across Italy started to form, with some of them being quite radical. And basically these groups would come together before and after the games, maybe even sometimes during the games, and clash with each other. Now, they did have a rule of conduct to not involve people outside of these groups, but sometimes, unfortunately, that wasn't always the case. And even within Naples, more extreme and radical and violent groups started to form as well, including, for example, in Curva B, Fedain, which was established in the late 70s. Now, you may be wondering, what is the difference between these group of Ultras and hooligans, which came about in England in the 80s and 90s, and then they just disappeared after a set of measures by the government. Now, hooligans are basically people that wanted to create chaos during the 90 minutes more or less of the game. Ultras are completely different. First off, hooligans by definition are violent people, whereas Ultras can be both violent and non-violent. There do exist people that are part of Ultras that just want to support the team with chants during the game. They don't necessarily all have to be violent. Secondly, Ultras have a strong sense of identity, often rooted with a specific neighborhood in the city, obviously the football club that they support, and sometimes their political views. So really, it is basically their identity. The group itself also has a very hierarchical structure, with certain people being decision makers, and they have meeting points in the city, basically a headquarters, where they conduct business, they organize future activities, and sometimes they get involved in illegal activities such as money laundering and drug trafficking, often associated with mafia clans. Now, another thing to note is that Ultras can be of all social classes, and so it's actually very hard to combat them by just raising ticket prices because, well, financially speaking, they don't necessarily have the same limitations as hooligans did, which all came from lower class backgrounds, and they weren't organized enough to conduct all the type of other activities, which in turn finances their ability to buy tickets, go to away games, and whatnot. Now that we know what makes and doesn't make an Ultra, in the 90s and 2000s, they went through a bit of a turbulent time. From an external Italy-wide point of view, some crazy violent scenes broke out between fans, and the government started to crack down on Ultras and all the illegal activities that they were conducting, putting in new safety measures and whatnot, which basically reduced their power and impact significantly. Internally, many of the ultra leaders either had to step down, died, or moved on. And this caused all sorts of mergers and splits between ultras, and ultimately maybe they lost a bit of identity, and this also reduced their impact and their importance in the game. Now, on a very specific Napoli club level, the club after the Maradona years wasn't doing too well and even went bankrupt and had to go all the way down to Serie C. And so over those years, the rapport between the club and the Ultras wasn't as good as maybe it was previously. The Ultras started criticizing how the club was run, and in turn, the club didn't want to have anything to do with these group of people that were creating all the chaos externally. All right, now we get to the De Laurentiis era. So De Laurentiis buys the club basically from bankruptcy in 2004, and De Laurentiis comes from a very privileged, high-class background. He is very elitist. He is very also black and white. He basically sees ultras all the same way, all being criminals. He doesn't understand that there might be some gray areas. And De Laurentiis has this utopian vision of a stadium that has atmosphere but also doesn't involve ultras. Now, he is the owner of the club and he runs the club extremely well from a financial point of view, and he feels like it belongs to him. He's called it in the past his family toy. On the other hand, you've got still this group of ultras which, yes, maybe are a bit less powerful than in the 80s, but they still consider that Napoli siamo noi, i.e. we are Napoli. They feel like they are the owners of Napoli. So there's a clear conflict between these two parties. They both feel like they're the most important ones there. Now, over the years, Napoli Ultras, like many others across Italy, have continued to behave negatively, badly, and create chaos. And oftentimes, this has resulted in multiple stadium closures or fines, and it's the club that has had to pay for it. So, De Laurentiis, over the years, together with the police, responds with stricter measures, banning certain types of banners, drums, megaphones, flags, requiring supporters to show ID on the ticket, requiring them to have a fidelity card to buy the abbonamento, which is the season pass, require them to sit at specific spots in the stadium instead of what people used to do before in the Curva, which is basically you show up and you sit anywhere, you stand anywhere, and that allowed the group of ultras to come together. Now, apparently, that has been re-allowed, but there was a period last year where De Laurentiis was really strict on that regard. Other things he's done, for example, is put CCTV cameras inside stadiums, which obviously some group of ultras really didn't appreciate. Now, all of these measures are aimed to limit these ultras from organizing themselves effectively as a collective, express their opinions against De Laurentiis, and most importantly, they allow the police to identify, track, and ban whoever is behaving irresponsibly. Now, over the years, De Laurentiis has called out these ultras for not being real fans, and has said that it's their fault if the stadium is not a family-friendly place. He also thinks of himself as a bit of a savior of Naples, many times saying that we would be nothing without him, and he's known to criticize the city of Naples for absolutely no reason. For example, saying he doesn't like Neapolitan pizza. Now, why would you say that? I mean, that goes way over the top. That crosses the line for me, personally. No, but yeah, he's been basically saying things against the ultras, against fans in general, against ex-players, against current players. He's basically a very controversial type of guy. Now, the ultras have been responding to these measures and these comments in several different ways with various degrees of success. Sometimes they've boycotted the game, other times they've been silent during the games, other times they were making chants against De Laurentiis, and other times they've been putting banners in the city. What we saw against Milan was they took it a step further and even had episodes of violence in the stadium. The Ultras also respond to De Laurentiis when he talks about a family-friendly place by saying, well, if you wanted a family-friendly place, why are you raising ticket prices so high? Obviously, people can't go and spend 400 euros per family for a game of football. Now, with regards to this ticket price thing, I personally feel that both parties are wrong. On the one side, you've got the ultras, where even if the ticket would cost €1, there's no chance that they would invite their wives and kids to the stadium. For them, the stadium is them and the boys, all right? So they don't get a say on whether something is family friendly or not. De Laurentiis, on the other hand, he doesn't really get a say in that either, because, okay, yes, he sets the ticket prices, but what does he know of the sacrifices a family in Naples, an average or lower end family, has to make in order to go to the stadium? And then there's the issue of the Scudetto celebrations that are imminent in the city. De Laurentiis and the police want an official party in the stadium and then various smaller parties in each neighborhood, but they want that to be controlled by the police. They want a certain limited number of people there for safety reasons. We also know what can happen in a crowd when you just let thousands and thousands of people in. It's a huge issue. In Turin, they had some problems with that at a concert a few years ago where several people lost their lives. And so in Naples, we really want to avoid that. On the other side, you've got the ultras that are saying that this basically limits their freedom to celebrate the Scudetto how they want to celebrate it, and they want to be involved in the setup and organization of it, and they want it to be open to everyone. Now, other things that the ultras want, which we haven't maybe touched upon, is they want a free zone inside the stadium where basically they can bring anything they want and they can make all the chaos they want, pretty much. Obviously, De Laurentiis and the police do not want that. They want a season pass without the fidelity card because they don't want to give away their data. Maybe not because they don't want the police to have their data, because I'm sure the police already has their data, but it's more just out of principle. So they're doing this whole thing based on an ideology where, in their view, you shouldn't be giving out data to watch a football game. And then they want concessions or pre-sale on tickets so that they can guarantee that they have their people at the stadium and they have a full ultras group for every game, because they're saying basically the way the tickets are done now, they basically go online at random moments. Anybody can get them at any time as long as they have the fidelity card, and there's a risk that if you're an ultra you don't get a spot in the stadium, and that's gonna obviously harm the team because then the choreography is not gonna work out. So they want concessions there. De Laurentiis instead says, no, you are worth just as much as any other supporter. We can't give you any sort of preferential access. Then I also wonder what some other requests the ultras are making, which they're not making public. And I'm sure that there's some, for example, having players over at their parties, this and that, like it was in the 80s. De Laurentiis in no way will budge to that. He doesn't even let players have shoots with Nike or Adidas, let alone them getting caught in a photo with one of the ultras. All right, now that we know a bit of the context between ultras and Napoli and De Laurentiis, why don't we invite some people that were there at the Napoli-Milan game to explain to us exactly what happened on that evening. Guys, so to talk about this in more detail and with some guys that are living this at the stadium, I've invited Daniel from Napoli Nation TV and Michele from Get Napoli Tickets to join us in this conversation. Now, I'd like to ask Michele the first question. Michele, can you explain, based on your understanding, why it is that this situation escalated the way it did? What is the major source of conflict between the Laurentiis and this group of ultras?
So yeah, it's a little bit of a complex issue, and it goes back a few years, but it's been getting worse and worse and worse over time. The most recent problems the Ultras have had with the Laurentiis go back to, I would say, a couple of years ago, 1 year and a half ago maybe. There have been some issues with basically De Laurentiis preventing people in Curva A and B from sitting in their own seats, and this just happened all of a sudden. This was always obviously always possible before. Like, I think in basically every curva all around Italy, it is always possible to sit everywhere because obviously the ultras and the people chanting need to aggregate in the middle, and all of a sudden, De Laurentiis with the police in Napoli decided to put a stop to this. And obviously, this caused a lot of boycotts. So if you remember, for a few months we didn't have ultras. A couple of a season ago,
Mhm.
that went on for a few months, and that was the issue. It just got worse and worse. Eventually, the seating issue got solved, but not the underlying problems between De Laurentiis and the ultras. So,
So
you know, a
I'll
group.
stop you there for a second. What is now the situation with the seating? Are they allowed to sit anywhere they want, or is there assigned seating?
No, fortunately, that got solved, so we can sit wherever we want, and thank God, because it was a nightmare. You know, I'm really not used to just like finding my. I have a season ticket, and I have no idea where my seat is. I never checked. I never bothered to check where my seat is. I have no idea. I just go to. Actually, funnily enough, I'd always go to the same place because I have some friends there, but I have no idea. I just know that it's someone in row one, but I have no idea where exactly in Curva B, and no one knows. You know, but for a few months, it was a natural nightmare because you would sit somewhere and then people would just, "I'm sorry, you're sitting in my place," and then you have to move and move and move, which, it's fine in other section, but not in Curva. So now it's the seating problem has been solved, and the ultras actually aggregate and they sit in the usual seats. But yeah, we have other issues now.
Okay, so it seems like some level of cooperation was found between in the Ultras and La Questura and De Laurentiis. So that's one issue. Now moving on to the more recent months, what's been going on?
So okay, so until well, before the World Cup break, so until November, everything was fine. So the ultras just went in normally. We had drums, we had flags, everything was back to normal. Then we went back to Serie A, and as we all know, there had been some problems in between Roma Ultras and Napoli Ultras. Both Ultras were going to away games, their respective away games, and they met in Tuscany, somewhere in Tuscany. They clashed. Make there was a big problem because they clashed in the middle of the motorway, one of the biggest motorway in Italy, and they basically had to divert traffic for hours. A lot of people got arrested. But after that, the questura, the police decided in Napoli, not in Rome, in Napoli, decided to punish the ultras groups involved in these clashes. So this is quite important because there's been a lot of confusion about this. Even yesterday, Napoli released a statement answering, saying, flags are allowed, but this is not true. And going to explain why. Because after January, all the flags, everything was fine for the groups not involved in the clashes except obviously one. So one group in Curva B and all the groups in Curva A were kind of like punished even more because obviously the people responsible got identified and arrested, but the groups as a whole got punished even more. So they were not allowed to bring in flags and drums in the stadium, which is why since January we have not had drums in Curva B, which is the only drum we have in the whole stadium usually. We have not had this drum, but all the other ultras groups were fine. And then for some reason the situation just escalated, and now it is not possible to bring in any flags whatsoever, any banners whatsoever, any drums whatsoever. So for some reason it just escalated. De Laurentiis and the police decided to crack down on this, and the excuse they found is because the ultras didn't put in any requests to bring in flags and drums because there is an actual bureaucratic protest request to procedure to bring in flags and banners, everything. So you need to actually send an email to Napoli, and they will eventually maybe accept it, and you will be allowed to bring in. There is a whole procedure about it, and they are just saying the ultras are not following it, so they're not allowed to bring in any flags and drums. So my question is, what happened what happened since January, because before January and forever they were always allowed to do that without any request. And I do not believe any ultras around Italy actually follow the procedure. Everyone is just allowed. It is true there are some rules and laws about this, but usually the police closes an eye because flags have never killed anyone, drums have never killed anyone. So I mean, what's the point? But now it's not allowed anymore. And actually, yesterday Napoli released a statement answering this very question because there have been some interviews, going back and forth between De Laurentiis and the Ultras, and De Laurentiis says, like we have to just kick out the ultras from the stadium. The ultras say we're not allowed to bring in flags anymore. The police says they are always allowed to bring in flags, but they need to put in an official request. And well, I went and looked at the official request rules, and you are not allowed to bring in any flags which is bigger than 20 centimeters. So something like that. So even if they actually request, through the procedure, they are not. They will just be denied. So I mean, it is clear that they are just making up rules as they go. That is the problem, and the underlying issue is that it's very simple actually. De Laurentiis does not want ultras in the stadium. That's it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, there's definitely there's definitely an issue there because I was speaking about this with Daniel before. I think the club, as much as they don't want ultras, they have to understand that they need ultras because that's the atmosphere. That's where the atmosphere originates from. Without ultras, the tifo goes down, and there's so many games that Napoli has won thanks to the fans, thanks to this so-called 12th man, and all this is led by the ultras. On the other hand, I am in favor of there being procedures in place to make sure that what you bring to the stadium is not going to be a safety hazard. It's not going to be any discriminatory or offensive material. We've seen so many occasions, I think, not necessarily in Naples, but across Italy, across the world, where certain banners have been brought in, which are racist, anti Semitic, and whatnot, with honestly flammable material, and it's a banner that maybe spreads across multiple seats, multiple rows, and that could be a safety hazard. So I'm all for procedures and pre-authorizations, but with a very commonsensical approach. Okay, a flag like this is not going to do anything. You want a big flag, fine. Let's just make sure it's built from the right materials. It doesn't have any offensive language on there. And then, we should be able to approve it. So they need to find a common ground. We can't just say no procedures, no nothing. And also, we can't just say on the other side, no ultras. We need to find a common ground. Daniel, I want to get your opinion on this. And what I want to ask you is, you've been going to the stadium now for quite a few years. How has the tifoseria in general changed over time? Did you notice, like I have, like maybe Michele has, that there's been ups and downs in the intensity of the fan engagement over the years and how it's maybe shifted from sector to sector?
Absolutely. What I've noticed from attending matches in the Distinti area over the years is when I used to go years back at the beginning, I felt like the ultras had representation even in the Distincti area. I don't know that for sure because I never really got myself involved, but there was chanting that was being led. There were a lot of flags, and they all congregated in the middle of Distincti and stood up and led these chants and had the flags and everything. And as the rules changed with seating assignments, like Michele was talking about in the Curva, in Distincti, it's been a few years now, I believe, where you have to sit where your ticket says to sit at. And as soon as that happened, from what I noticed, that went away in the Distincti. There's no more chanting, there's no more flags. There's just a few things that are done during player introductions and then they're taken down, and that's it. And everybody sits down and they're all real formal. And, Michele's bugged me about sitting on my tush all the time during a game. But that's an area where it's a little bit more civilized now, and I believe that there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a good thing because it's more family oriented. It's more of a place where you can bring your wife and your children and you can enjoy the game as a family a little bit easier than being in the curva. But like Michele was saying, without the curva doing what they do, I think we're the only stadium that has two curvas that do what they do, right, Michele? Correct me
As
if
far
I'm
as I can
wrong.
tell, as far as I can tell, yeah, I've never seen anything like it. So yeah, I think so.
So the atmosphere that both creates in that stadium and how they get the entire stadium on their feet, chanting, cheering, what have you, it is something special. And for Laurentiis to want to try to take that away, number one, he's making a mistake. And number two, it just makes him look like an egotistical asshole. I mean, I know he doesn't care about what people really think about him when it comes to him and his egotistical ways of doing things. But unfortunately, that's the perception that you're always going to give the general tifosi if this is the way that you treat the general tifosi, including the ultras.
Hmm.
Now, there are things that ultras do that shouldn't be done. There's criminal activity that's involved where none of us can deny that, right? But the actual things that go on in the stadium with the chanting and the flags and the drums, that is important, like you were saying, as having the 12th man. And if he wants to completely remove that, he's making a huge mistake, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I agree about that. Michele, from your experience in the Curva, how is the atmosphere? You know, De Laurentiis talks about wanting a family-friendly stadium. The people in the ultra groups are saying that's fine. We're a family-friendly group of people. Um, how do you interpret the situation? Is the Curva, let's debunk maybe some myths. Is it a dangerous place? Is it a family friendly place? What is it?
It's a totally family friendly place. I'm surrounded by children every game. I always go to the same seats, and there are actually always children next to me, always the same children. It's full of couples, it's full of family, old people, young people. People sometimes assume that to go to Curva, you have to be an ultras, or even you have to know all the songs, or you have to chant all the time. That's not true. That's not true. It's just cheap and affordable section for most people. It's full of tourists as well. When I have to get people tickets, people not from Italy even, um, I have no problems getting them tickets to Curva because that's totally tourist friendly. People really welcome tourists there. I think I've seen some celebrations even on tourists sometimes. Like I always bring people in there, and sometimes they, like, when they realize that they are not from Napoli, they're not from Italy, and they support Napoli, they offer them beers and stuff like that. So it's totally safe. Obviously, there are some rules to follow, some unspoken rules, and one of the unspoken rules is clearly, if you are not an ultras, you don't sit in the middle, right in the middle, because that's where the ultras sit. They want to be there, they want to be all together, and obviously, if you don't know the chance, I mean, right in the middle, it's not where you want to be because they to propagate chants in the curva and then in the whole stadium, they have to come from right in the middle where the flags are, where the drums are. And if you don't know the chants, I mean, they're not gonna say anything, but it's better not to sit there. It's just not nice. Um, but for the rest, it's absolutely fine. It's just that it's been changing a little bit over the years, but it's mostly the same. I was also one of the people who was afraid of Curva at the beginning. And no one knows that when I started to go to the stadium, I used to go to Distinti first because I didn't know about Curva. I heard of all the stories. Yeah, the ultras are crazy and criminal, and they're just gonna beat you up. Well, I mean, I was very broke, so after a while, I couldn't afford to go to Distinti anymore, and then I decided to get the cheaper seats in Curva, and then I just loved it. I never left it anymore. Not just because it's cheap, but and safe, but also because the atmosphere is used to be at least used to be amazing. So yeah, no, there is absolutely nothing wrong with Curva. Everyone is welcome.
For me, I've been a few times. There was one time when I went. It was Napoli Arsenal in the Europa League game. It's the second leg. We already lost the first game. We were losing the second game. We'd been sing. It was cold. We'd been singing for 90 minutes. On the 90th minute, I stopped singing, and one of the guys comes up to me and he says, "Look, I'm gonna tell you for the first time, real nice. You have to sing, otherwise go home." I'm like, okay, okay, fair enough, fair enough. But I mean, it was, he said it very calmly, right? I kind of was scared at the time, But but I mean, I get it. Like I was in the middle. I had to do my bit.
Yeah,
And
but
yeah, other times I went and I was a bit more to the side and no one bothered me. So as you
I
say, it's if you're in a specific spot, you got to do a specific thing. Now, I also want to clarify that ultras does not mean the whole sector, as you said. It's just the central group. It's maybe what, 600-700 people.
yeah, I think so. Probably even fewer than that.
Yeah, and within the curva, there's different groups of ultras, right? There's the Fedain, there's the Ultra 72, there's all these groups. Now, what happened against Milan, from my understanding, is two groups of ultras having a different opinion on how to support the team. So, from what I understand, there's the Fedain, which I think are a bit more radical, maybe in Curva B, which basically wanted people to turn their backs on the game. They wanted to stay silent, at least for the first 15 minutes. And then there was the other group of ultras, the Ultra 72, which actually, you know, they are okay with La Tessera del Tifoso, and they're okay with, they wanted to support the team. They didn't want to turn their back. And this clash happened where one group of ultras wanted to create the hole in the center as a sign of protest, and the other group was kind of against it. That's what I heard, and then they started fighting between each other. Now, that's my understanding being an outsider. You guys were there at the Curva on Sunday, so tell me maybe exactly what happened. Let me know if I made a mistake in
Okay.
my interpretation.
Yes, so there have been a lot of articles about what happened in Curva, and I would say that most of them are wrong because I was in Curva with Daniel, and we were not too far from where the clashes happen, and we have no idea what they happen. So I heard some stories. I don't. Some people go over and come back and report to me, but we actually don't know. And I find it funny that like people from different sections or people from not even inside the stadium already knew what happened all of a sudden. So let me just bust some myths about what happened on Sunday. So first of all, you mentioned some groups asking people to turn their backs to the game. That has not been the case. That is not what I saw. This is not. I had some friends all around Curva B, and no one told me that they were asked to turn their back to the game, and they did not see anyone turning their backs to the game. I have some pictures from the game even because I usually take pictures. I could see like I went back because I asked myself, wait, did I miss something? Did I maybe miss people giving just giving their backs to the game? But yeah, I saw the pictures again. No one is has turned their back to the game whatsoever. So um, I've personally I've never seen any protest like that in Curva B. I know this is common in other stadiums sometimes, but that has not happened ever in Curva B. So the protest was announced first of all, and then it was obviously executed in the stadium. What was announced was being silent in Curva. So what they all said, first Curva A and then Curva B said, we will not be chanting inside the stadium. We will just be silent to protest. The official excuse was the increase in ticket prices in Champions League because I don't know if you saw that, but we had some like disgusting ticket prices for Napoli Milan in Champions League, and the official reason for protest was the ticket prices. Obviously, we gave context, so I told you all the other problems we had in Curva, but that was the specific reason for on Sunday. I was surprised to see that actually when we went inside the Curva, there was no silence, but there were chants, but only chants against the Laurentiis. Not all groups were chanting against the Laurentiis, but most groups were chanting. So I don't know what happened, and I don't know which groups were involved in the clashes. I can speculate and I can make an informed guess as to what happened. And my informed guess is that two groups of ultras were disagreeing on how to protest. And the protest was, in my opinion, what happened was one of them wanted to chant against the Laurentiis and the other one wanted to stay silent. I have read on some articles that they actually wrote that the one of the groups wanted to start supporting the team after the first goal. I I don't know. Again, I don't believe that's true. because usually ultras are not that flexible. When they announce something, they do it, and they announce silence. So the protest against the Laurentiis was the actual surprise. So I believe that the ultras decided to, maybe they wanted to do maybe a couple of chants against the Laurentiis, but that's it. While other groups just went on and on and on during the whole game. And yeah, right in the middle of the curva, they clashed. And the big space that you saw in the pictures, in the articles, and maybe on television, I'm not sure, is not part of the protest. There was just people running away, fleeing from the scene, from the clashes.
Hmm.
There was not organized. They were just fighting with belts, even, and it was not a lot of them. It was just, I think, from what I could see, it was like maybe 10 people, 10, like 5 to 10 people clashing like that. There was a lot of argument, verbal argument, and then like I saw a couple of belts just waving around. But no, it's just the protest was just being silent. Some groups decided to chant against De Laurentiis, and then at the 80th minute, some people with their faces covered went inside the stadium, and they just threw some flares. They lit up some flares and they threw them inside the, well, not the pitch, but on the running track. So
Yeah.
that was the extent of the protest. I have not been asked to stay silent. I didn't chant. There were some spontaneous chants, and I have not seen the ultras asking people not to chant. So where I well, where I stay in Curva B, I am right next to one of the groups in Curva B. I think it's Fedain, and some spontaneous chants appeared in Curva for the team, and these ultras did not ask people to stay silent. The only thing they asked was not to boo their chants, because
Hmm.
they were chanting against the Laurentiis, and a few people, not around me, but mostly from the Tribune and the Distinti, they booed and whistled against the ultras chanting like offensive chants towards the Laurentiis. And one
Yes.
of the ultras, just one guy, very angry, turned towards the rest of the curva, and generally he asked not to boo, like in an aggressive and violent way, verbally, obviously. But he threatened people not to boo their chants. That's it. But they did not threaten people when they were chanting for the team, and they did not threaten people when they didn't turn their backs to the game, because no one did. No one did.
Which brings me to my other point, that the stadium as a whole is not united. You've got obviously different groups of ultras. Then you've also got the Distinti Tribune, which I believe are majority pro De Laurentiis. And every time I go to the stadium and there's chants against De Laurentiis coming from the Curva, and I've heard this multiple times in the past years, the Tribune and Distinti always boo them. Now, the other thing about this is that the ultras, whilst they have some very good reasons to protest the high prices, because De Laurentiis is taking advantage of this historic moment in Napoli, the way they go about it then feeds into the story that De Laurentiis is telling, that ultras are violent people, that it's a dangerous place for families, so you know ultras, if they want to somehow get something out of this battle, they need to change their ways. They can't fall into these traps. They have to remain civil. They also can't be telling people, in my opinion, to not boo them, or not. They can't tell people what to do. You want to stay quiet, stay quiet. You want to chant, chant. But if I pay a ticket and I go to the stadium, just like you have your right to express yourself, I have my right to express myself, if I want to boo you or if I want to support you, as long as I'm not being offensive towards anybody. Because the problem I have with them is they believe they own the entire curva, or they say Napoli siamo noi. That's not true. Napoli is to whoever wants to be part of Napoli. Napoli belongs to the Laurentiis, belongs to the players, the coach, the ultras, the 5-year-old fan, and the 60-year-old woman. It belongs to everybody, and it belongs to people outside of Napoli as well, that spend also their money to support with TV subscription, merchandise, waking up at 5 in the morning from Australia. It belongs to everybody. So The problem that I see here in this conflict is that everybody, the two protagonists, the Ultras and the Laurentiis, both thinks that they're the sole owner of Napoli. And for me, that's a problem. Daniel, do you think somehow these two very different people, groups of people, can somehow come together and give us a calmer end of the season, an end of the season where we can celebrate the Scudetto in a way that both people are happy? Or do you still think that this is a problem that we're going to carry on and ruin our season uh, from now until the end?
Um, so to be honest, you got me a little bit emotional because it's not gonna change, man. They're not gonna work together.
Mm.
So
Michele, Michele, what do you think about this? Is something gonna happen where they can come together and and work things out, or no?
Uh, it's a little bit problematic. I think I was smiling when you were talking, not because I disagree with you, but because you were describing a little bit of an utopia. That I don't think that what you said is absolutely right, but I don't think it's gonna happen. The problem is that yeah, well, those two groups of the Laurentiis and the Ultras both want to have power over each other, and
Mhm.
the problem for the Ultras is that the actual power is in the Laurentiis hands. So they are fighting a losing battle, but they are too proud to realize that, and maybe stupid. Let's be honest. I think they're way too used to actually having power in Curva. Like you said, they think they are the owners of the Napolitan tifo, and it is a shame. I've explained a little bit in great details in my latest episode of the podcast, In the Shadow of Vesuvius, that what they need to do, in my opinion, is actually realize that they are not the owners on the curva, and they have to involve other normal fans in this fight, because they are actually alone. A lot of, as you said, actually after the fight, actually when they were fighting, and when the big gap was created inside the curva, from the distinti, the chant go out spread all over the stadium. And well, I mean, are they wrong? I mean, I've always been of the opinion that the ultras are a necessary evil in the stadium, because I don't really like them, in the sense that they are very arrogant. They think they have to have power in curva. They think they can tell people what to do. But then again, we need them, because they everywhere in Europe, everywhere in Italy, if you want to chant, if you want to organize something, you need the ultras, you need their organization, you need their drums, the big flags. Everyone every one of us has some kind of, like, background picture, maybe on our phones, of Napoli choreography. We love the Ti amo, I love you choreography in Curva B, and the Vesuvius erupting, and you know we love the videos of flags waving in Curva B. So if we like that, then we cannot ask the ultras to leave, because if they leave, we're not gonna have this anymore. And well, yeah, I mean, the truth, I think, is right in the middle, as I said, because I don't think De Laurentiis can have his ways, but I don't think the ultras can have their ways. I think probably the solution is to find a compromise, but it has to come from the ultras first.
Mm.
I don't think De Laurentiis will compromise. I don't think he cares. Uh, Judging De Laurentiis' actions, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. He's been giving interviews for the past 2 days about this, and he's just doubling down about banning the ultras. He's asking for the Thatcher laws to be implemented in Italy as well. That's what he loves, and he just wants the ultras out of the way. He doesn't want them inside the curva. He just wants control over the whole stadium. He wants people to sit in their own seats. So yeah, I mean, it's quite sad. I understand why Daniel gets emotional, because for me, it's extremely, extremely sad to see Curva be dying. I made a tweet on Sunday, or yeah, after the game. I just said very simply, Curva B died today, uh, and I think that's what happened. Unfortunately, my feeling is that we reached a point of no return, because the ultras are too uh, arrogant and proud to realize that they have to take a step back, They want to have it like they used to have it in the 80s, in the 90s, in the 2000s, where they could do whatever they wanted. They could just like go outside the stadium and fight with the other ultras. They could go inside the stadium and do whatever they wanted. That's not gonna happen anymore, and for the
Well,
best,
also back in the
probably.
day, in the 80s and 90s, clubs actually had a pseudo partnership with the Ultras, where in return for their support and in return to keep things relatively peaceful, the club would give them access to players when they opened a new restaurant, or when they had a birthday party of one of the head of Ultras, or maybe pre-access to tickets. And nowadays, we're seeing that this is not the case. I mean, De Laurentiis has always cracked down on this kind of stuff. Players can't even have a photo shoot with Nike, let alone a Capultra. so, um, so yeah, they're obviously not happy that they don't have access to these things like they did back in the day. De Laurentiis, as you said, he's not going to step down. He's actually doubling down. The fact that Napoli is so successful nowadays this season actually has given him even more power, because now the average fan is going to be on his side, because an average fan is going to think, look at where De Laurentiis has taken us this year. So he knows that he's got more power than ever. The club is more valuable than ever, and he's gonna double down on these things. And maybe you're right. Maybe this is the end, the start of the end of il tifo organizzato, because I think when they themselves are split between each other, that's not good for the long run. Daniel, I wanted to ask you, uh, from now on, you had this experience of going in Curva B. Are you gonna go back and hang out with Michele there? Or are you gonna leave him alone with the ultras?
Well, I got at least one more game with them, the Champions League game. So yeah, hopefully nobody looks towards my direction this time and tells me to shut the fuck up because he thought I was booing. Like Michele said, that I'll be honest with you. I wasn't really uncomfortable at any moment during that entire game, other than when he said that, because he was serious. And even though I knew it wasn't me, I could feel the tension. And if somebody responded at all to what he said, who knows? A fight could have broke out right there too,
Hmm.
because he was serious. He wasn't just saying that to say it. You could see it in his eyes. And that small group that's there next to Michele, they're serious about what they do, and they are important. But like you were saying, it shouldn't get to the point where anybody is anywhere in the curva that feels any tension about how they're acting. If they're not chanting perfectly, if they're not completely participate in everything that's going on, and there was moments where I was like, are they going to get upset that we're not chanting anti De Laurentiis stuff? I did think that a couple times. Are they going to start expecting everybody around? And that didn't happen, thank God, because I just I don't know. I think if you want to protest De Laurentiis, it's okay maybe to do a chant or two at the beginning before the game starts. But once the game starts, if you're going to do any chanting, it's for the dudes on the pitch.
Exactly.
It's for the
Exactly.
dudes on the pitch, and talking about, I absolutely 100% do not believe that those two parties by themselves are going to be able to resolve this conflict. But I do believe that if Spalletti and or any of the players stood up and said something, they might be gone next season, because that's how Dalintis operates.
Hmm.
But something like that, I think, is needed. Something where the players and or the coach, which the ultras are going to listen to also, right? Like they're going to listen if they stand up and they say something. They will. I just don't know if that's going to happen, and outside the stadium at the subway stop, when they were doing what everybody wants to see with the chanting in support of the club and the team, was beautiful. It was beautiful, man. And we need that in the stadium.
Mm.
You know
Mm.
what I mean? We don't need this bullshit against Laurentiis during the game when we're winning a Scudetto. We don't need that. That isn't what it means to cheer your team.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely, I think they should protest if they feel like they want to protest. I mean, that's the basis of any democratic society. But they need to find a way which is non-violent, and they need to do it not during a game in a way that will affect the team. Maybe do it at halftime. Maybe do it before the game, at halftime, after the game. But when that ball is in movement, do not do it. Support the players on the field, focus on the game. There just has to be a better way to go about the business. Michele, Daniel, any closing thoughts on this situation before we wrap it up?
It's it's a really sad situation. I think, well, I mean, based to answer to what you said just now, I agree with you. It's just that we can't ask Ultras to do anything. I mean, if they want to protest, they have to do it their own way. I disagree with the way they decided to protest. To be honest, it has worked in the past because that's what they did when they were banned. When they were punished from for sitting in the wrong seats. They decided to just boycott games. They didn't come. The stadium became a library, and after a while, the police and the Laurentiis decided to eventually give in, and they let them back in again. So I mean, it worked in the past. I disagree. I think there can be other ways. I don't think we are in a position to tell them what to do. But yeah, I mean, I really wish we found a solution. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because it's a very complex situation. What they complain about is also that they are the only one. They are not any worse than other ultras in Italy, but they are the only ones getting punished for it. Maybe Juventus Ultras got punished a little bit, but they were much much worse than this. Like they were actually what you said that it was happening in the 80s. It was actually happening until 3 4 years ago in Turin
Yeah.
with Juventus fans. They were actually they were threatening Juventus executives to get free tickets. They were scalping on the tickets. They were making a huge amount of money. There's so many shitty stuff going on they were with Juve Ultras, and obviously, well, I mean, they got punished for it. But Napoli Ultras, I mean, yes, there have been clashes with other fans when they visited Napoli or when they were abroad. I disagree with that. They are shameful, but they're not any worse than Roma Ultras, Lazio Ultras, Verona Ultras, Milan Inter. If people overlook on it, but like
No,
when
I believe those are then separate problems. I mean,
yeah, but it's
we
the same
shouldn't, we
country.
shouldn't, but we shouldn't be holding our ultras to those standards. We need to have higher standards than the other ultras. Like, like it's like saying, "Oh well, I stole a purse. That's not as bad as this guy stealing a car." It's like, well, you shouldn't compare one thing to another. Like, it should just be that they should just not get into fights. They should just not do anything shady in the first place. Like, just because other people are getting away with it, if we have, I think, a very difficult city as a context, and it's difficult to operate in Napoli. But we have a president and the police that's trying to do something about it, instead of maybe trying to say, well, in Milan they're getting away with it. We should actually be applauding the fact that we're trying to do something that might stop violence, that might stop. Now, whether they're doing it the right way, whether they're exaggerating, whether they need to find different ways, but yeah, I don't think it's a good argument to say, well, they're getting away with it somewhere else. It's like we should have higher standards than that. But I do agree with everything that you are saying with regards to, we need them. They're a necessary evil. Let's call it like that. And hopefully they can find a way to protest in a way that's you know, more civil. The one where they did last year, where they deserted the stadium, that's much more civil. It affected the team. They need to find a new way that's civil and doesn't affect the team. It's super complicated. It's a lot of, pressure on them as well. And I'm sure they're conflicted as well because they want to support the team. They want to be cheering and everything. So yeah, not an easy situation.